Okay, we're live now.
Okay, great. So committee, we're gonna this Senate Gov up on the 22nd of February. We're gonna get back to S310, our government response to flood recovery and resilience, whatever the name of it is, that bill. The flood safety, can you come up with a name for it? Okay, let's do that. You guys, we didn't put you on that.
Fun name with
Fun name.
acronym.
Yeah, okay, but more importantly, we have, so the bill is still, just committee and anybody who's watching, the bill is still kind of muddy. It's, there's still quite a bit of work to do, but we have enough updates on the bill that I wanted the committee to go through the bill and talk about what other work we need to do. We have Tim, we have Tucker, because he has a big section in it, and we have Eric Foran. And hey, Tim, can you see Eric where he's sitting?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just wanted, I was gonna make you move if you couldn't see you. So just in case, I want to make sure people can see. And we're gonna just go through the bill, probably Tucker or Tim in
One of my sons.
medium level detail.
Okay.
Certainly point out any changes, but also medium level detail, because I really want people to start digging into the language to make sure what it is what we want in the sections. I found some things this morning that I was like, oh, that really needs to be changed. And as we're going through, we can stop and discuss things. And Eric, please feel free to chime in and get my attention, because I want you at the table too. I mean, and literally, if you want to come sit with us, you can. Okay, Tim, why don't you take it away and start going through the draft?
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Before you should have two documents. One is a strike all amendment to S310. And let's see, this is draft 2.1 now. It is now 64 pages and is dated to today from 12:30. This will have, for ease of reference, Tucker and I have gone through and highlighted all portions that will introduce differing or new text as to the underlying, compared to the underlying S310 bill. The second document you'll have access to is a summary of the strike all amendment to S310, also looking at draft 2.1. And let's see, that is the 3-pager. I apologize, I didn't have enough time to give this off to my colleague Tucker Anderson, so there's no summary of the municipal stormwater utility provisions at this moment. But anyways, so turning back to the actual bill, here we can see, sorry, let me just pause here. Chair Hardy, would you like me to kind of bounce between the documents and then maybe where the new text is, kind of pause and kind of zoom in at that point?
Maybe what are you're ready to dive into the language? Okay. Yeah, go ahead and do that. And
Is there a better time?
no, there's not a better
Let's look
time
up.
now. Let's go.
Okay.
Bounce around as you need to.
Sure. And okay, so the first part of the bill pertains to the creation of the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Fund. And this, now you can see the first highlight on page 1 there. Also expands it, well, the reader assistance heading now refers to the grant program as well. Again, this may look familiar because it incorporates all sections of another bill, S145, which was an act relating to the Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Fund, except for the findings of that bill. These sections, and sorry, the sections really 1 through 3, bundled here, create a Community Resilience and Disaster Mitigation Grant Program to be administered by the Department of Safety for the purpose of awarding grants for municipal disaster mitigation projects, which now will include, and we'll see the new language at the top of page 2, not only the awarding of grants for what was in here before, which was the technical assistance for natural disaster mitigation to municipalities, but also the technical assistance for the improvement of municipal stormwater systems. And this replaces another section in the bill, was previously, I believe, section 9, which was all about a grant program for municipal stormwater systems. So really, the two have kind of been conflated here, or really one's been folded into the other, I should say more accurately. And let's see. Also, I should note these sections also have a appropriation of $15 million that will initially stand up the fund. We can see that scrolling down. Where is that?
Page 4.
Sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
page 4. And I've highlighted that in blue at the request of the chair, just to mark a point of notice and also perhaps discussion as well. And you can see the other highlights on that page have to do with including this committee and the House Sister Committee as recipients of the Community Resilience Disaster Mitigation Fund report that would be issued annually.
And Tim, I'm gonna just note that on top of page 2, paragraph C, there's the addition of public collections and historic value. You all remember we got testimony from the sort of coalition of arts and history and cultural organizations. And they need some suggestions about where to sort of insert that their work into the bill. So that's this is one of the sections.
Right.
Yes, thank you very much for pointing that out, Chair Hardy. There's 3 other additions of similar language pertaining to the Arts Council, arts organizations and libraries as well. Make sure to point those out throughout.
Great additions.
Let's see. So, and again, I'll pause on section 3 regarding that appropriation. Chair Hardy, I'm not sure if you want to discuss that or not, or if you'd like me to keep going at this point.
I think mostly it's highlighted so we know that we have to come back to this. And I
Okay.
think a lot of it we'll have to have this discussion once we maybe find a funding source. And once we finish the bill and we see all the things we put into the bill. So this is just, I asked him to highlight it so we don't forget to come back and have this discussion, but I think it's premature at this point. So.
Okay.
So,
And I would just say, thank you, Madam Chair, for highlighting this. And we did, I did want to note that while $15 million may seem like a large number, it costs us over $1 billion to recover.
yes,
At this point
yes,
from one. So, to point it out.
exactly. Yeah, so it's actually kind of a small amount of money. All right, Tim, carry on to the next part.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Eric.
And you did have a pin in potentially asking for reoccurring funds at some point as well? That language was taken out from the original version.
Yes, so are you talking about the, wait,
Mitigation fund, that during the first draft of this, you had $3 million reoccurring every year to be deposited into the. That
yes,
was taken out because it had to go across the hall for.
right,
funding
so
sources.
we're still working on a potential funding source. I'm meeting with the chair of finance
15 is fine,
tomorrow.
but it does.
We need to
we
find
spend it fast.
exactly, so this I think the intent is that it would be an annual amount, a reoccurring amount, not a one-time amount. So
3 million.
the 15 million.
Oh, so we're gonna need it because over 20 years, we're gonna be spending more.
But it also might include funding for the Vermont Emergency Management Division itself. And you'll see later in the bill, there's some money for the Swiftwater Rescue Team. So that might actually come out of whatever funding source we find too. So it'd be sort of like a package deal of funding, not only grants, but some of the actual administration of what we're asking the department to do. But so it's still sort of put a pin in it until we know the full picture and have more idea of how much it will cost and how we might be able to fund it.
But I think the point of one time versus reoccurring, we're still very focused on that question. We have not
Right.
answered that question.
I think some of it has to be reoccurring.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Tim.
Sorry, but this is only one-time money right here because it's only for fiscal year
Yeah,
25.
that's,
Yes, this is only one time right now. This remains an open question because we need to figure out a funding source.
just a.
Powerball doesn't fit.
Right. All right, Tim, go ahead.
Okay, so this brings us to the next part of the bill having to do with emergency response personnel, in particular sections 4 through 6. This bill incorporates all sections of another bill, that is S-250, an act relating to emergency management personnel. These sections will create a definition of emergency response personnel, which will include not only managing personnel, but also public works personnel, who will be treated akin to traditional emergency-oriented professions like firefighters and police for the purposes of emergency response. And let's see, although section 4 is not changed here aside from the actual number of it, and number 5 only has a small adjustment on the bottom of page 7 having to do with coordination. I would say the more substantial changes occur in section 6, beginning on page 9. This has to do with local emergency planning committees, the creation of them and duties of them. To provide the committee additional context, I've inserted really the entire language of this section, so it can be really understood exactly where these changes occur in context of the rest of the statutory language. And this is where we find the other references to local libraries and arts and cultural organizations inserted. So again, this is in the context of local emergency planning committees. Let's see, 20 VSA 32, subsection B. We have all local emergency planning committees shall include representatives from the following. This will now include.
Just a question for you.
Yeah, hold on, go ahead.
Okay, so the question I have for you is ideas that we have for changes and additions. We want to note now, we want to finish getting through the bill. And then note the things we might want to talk about for later.
Yeah, so, I mean, I
So
think we
just
can
keep
sort
it
of
running.
do it as we go a little bit, but as long as we can make sure we're getting through the whole bill. So if you do you have something?
I do, I would like to add, if we're gonna be as specific as local libraries, I'd like to add historic sites.
Okay, so one thing, hold that thought, because Eric had a suggestion here, and Tim, you'll note what Eric is gonna say is consistent with what you said to me. I think you were right, and so Eric, go ahead.
So for clarification, the local emergency planning committees, LEPCs, there's one for the whole state now. And its mandate is hazardous materials only.
Oh, right.
So it's about the storage, the transportation, spilling of hazardous materials. I spoke with the hazmat chief on the way out, and he explained that the entities that are listed now, you have the hospitals because of injuries, you have the industries that are holding them, you have the guard because they have a response team. All those are hazmat, hazardous materials specific. So local libraries doesn't necessarily fit in there, or including arts and cultural organizations. But what that might fit into is the regional emergency management committees, the REMCs, which are at a county level or at an area level. They're the EMDs that meet, they're the local EMDs for hospitals, they're the local EMDs for colleges. It's another, basically another group that we've set up to try to get to that county level. To have the locals get together and talk about what they can do. And that might be a place where libraries could come in and say, we have this resource or we don't have this resource.
Okay, Senator Watson.
REMDs, Regional Emergency Management Districts? No.
C committee,
Committees, REMC.
C.
So did you hear that, Tim?
Yes.
That maybe include them in the REMC statutes?
Okay.
And those were the things that we changed the forum on, right, last year? Yeah,
Yes, we did.
okay,
That worked well.
So
yeah, Senator Clarkson.
I hate to say this, Eric, but I think you need to, either we need to rename it or you need to rename it, because local emergency planning committees, A, implies there's more than one, and you said there's only one, and it's statewide, so it's not local. So can we
So we-
rename it? Because I think and are we hoping that the regional emergency planning committees will suffice and be countywide and not be town by town planning?
Yeah, so the backstory here is local emergency management planning committees used to be local. There was 13 of them. And we, the local EMDs got involved in there, but their specific task from the federal government is hazardous materials. So we were kind of taking over their local meetings. So we then took and created one state level entity that has representation from all the state REMCs. So one of the statutes, the REMCs, they have to have a appointee to the LEPC, lots of acronyms. LEPC, the REMC, the Regional Emergency Management Committee has to have an appointee to the BEM to help with the thyroid SPR. They have to have an appointee for
We need a map for
their
this.
hazard identification and risk assessment and the state preparedness response. So basically what we did was we bifurcated the two because they had their special task and we were
Yeah,
kind of taking it over. And the REMCs are now that local entity. And we were hoping
more local.
more local because it's made up of the EMDs from each town in that area are supposed to go to these. And that's why we had an issue with it.
But my point is still that we
The
can
name
get
is-
rid of the word local. We want statewide or planning.
So maybe unless it's required by federal law, I mean, Tim, maybe we could rename this and make it more accurate to what it's now doing. And that, I mean, is that?
I'm not sure where the name is derived from. I mean, their tasking is a federal level tasking, so I don't know.
But let's
So
explore.
can you,
Take a look at that.
can you look into that, Tim, with Eric and see
Sure.
if maybe renaming this and making sure that it's clear the two entities, what they're doing in statute, because it sounds like maybe there's a little. It sounds like what's happening in reality and what's happening in statute might not be exactly the same,
Right,
but
exactly.
Okay,
to Eric's point, I think that language about cultural organizations and local libraries, putting that in the regional.
Right.
The regional ones instead of the
Okay.
local ones, which aren't local.
okay, that sounds good.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. And,
Fine.
okay,
Money, exactly, money.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I was gonna say on the bottom of page 10, the designated shelter locations. Is that also something that should be in the regional?
So that one I would recommend just striking because it's not an REMC. Regional Emergency Management Committee. So in the shelter section, you've already asked us to validate that the locals have shelter plans. So the shelter plan should be local.
Yeah,
And then the REMCs are just
So who in the local, which organization at the local level would identify those shelters?
the language that you had incorporated and we kind of ran with was that the EMDs would incorporate shelter plans into their local emergency management plans.
So the EMDs are the town people who are doing,
So right now, in the local emergency management plan, there's a section that says, what's your shelter? So the way that you wrote it, I envisioned that we tried to extrapolate on that, like, go beyond just the name and location and think of the plan and think of maybe Plan B and
okay,
where it's located. So that's at the local level because they're the ones. And then
okay,
if the way we look at it is if that local shelter that can hold 10 people now has 20, then it has to go up to a regional shelter
okay,
that is run by Red Cross. And that's their plan, right? If we can house 10 people and we have volunteers to do that and we have 10 cots, but once we get to 12 people, our plan is to do this.
okay. And that language is not in here yet, because I didn't get it in time, but we'll take out,
You guys had some similar language in there. We just tweaked it a little.
okay, bottom of page 10. I think, Tim, we take out the designate the local shelters right now here. Okay.
Okay.
All right, carry on then.
Great. So the remaining chapters of the remaining changes in this section on page 11 have to do with local libraries and arts and cultural organizations. So we've already discussed that. Let's kind of put a pin in those for now. This brings us to the municipal stormwater utilities, starting on page 7. I'll hand it over to my colleague, Attorney Anderson, to speak to this.
Attorney Anderson, come on up.
who's Attorney Anderson?
Oh, right. Tucker.
Tucker.
Well, good afternoon. For the new record, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. Sections 7 through what used to be 9 and what I believe in the draft is now 8A, because I didn't want to mess up Tim's excellent numbering of the sections, relates to the municipal stormwater utilities. You've already had an overview of these sections and some discussion around what is in them. But to circle back, the summary is that this would combine 2 chapters of existing law related to municipal sewer utilities to ensure consistency between those chapters and to make it expressly clear that yes, municipal corporations do have the authority to establish stormwater utilities and to provide some clear and express authority around rate making and the use of the revenue from stormwater rates. Bringing you to the highlighted provisions and giving you an explanation of what they do. So the first instances you'll find are on page 13 in subdivision 7. There were some outdated terms that were used in these chapters, existing law.
For sure.
Yes, so to eliminate some of the terms such as storm sewerage, which refers to methods of mixing stormwater runoff and sewage. This has been replaced with a broader term that doesn't call out that outdated system of mixing those runoff. And that's used water supply or stormwater. And that gets rid of terms like groundwater, storm sewage, things like that.
Good idea.
Subdivision 8 adds a reference to stormwater control system, which is a definition that you will find on page 14. New definition. This is not anything that existed in either of the chapters before. And this refers to structures or improvements, whether structural or non-structural, necessary for collecting, containing, essentially conveying stormwater, including sewers, curbs, drains, conduits, natural and man-made channels, pipes, and culverts. It's a non-exhaustive list, but think of anything that can be used to re-divert stormwater or to control it or contain it for a period of time. Crab ponds, things like that. Why is this being added? Well, because the language in those chapters started as sewer utilities, all of the references to the infrastructure were very specific to sewers, pipes, right, conduits. So all the authority that municipalities had to, for example, enter property to continue some sort of infrastructure for these utilities was tied to those specific things like pipes. So stormwater control system is added here so that it broadens it, so that it's clear that they can dig ditches, dig culverts, add rocks to ditches so that the water will run slower through them into whatever the diverted stream or floodplain is. Okay,
Okay.
so you'll notice that throughout that term is added. On page 15, the highlighted language there, this exists in the underlying law. It was just a piece that I missed when I was consolidating everything together. So when I went through and reviewed, I noticed that this piece of existing law was not included in chapter 101, so I added it in.
Okay.
Page 16, you'll notice that that's where the stormwater control system references are added in the authority to lay and connect pipes, for example, or to enter on land to add pipes, now stormwater control systems. Okay. I feel.
Okay.
Skip to page 22. There was another outdated reference here that allowed in section 3613 municipal corporations to sell sludge or fertilizer byproducts incident to sewage disposal. And the attorney in our office who handles sludge informed me that this should have a clause that clarifies that this can only be done when consistent with state or federal law.
Great.
There's an attorney in your office that handles sludge.
Michael Grady handles all things sludge.
Yes.
He's.
Although I don't see the word sludge,
Fluent 6 right there in line 12.
but I'm missing it. Oh, there it is,
Or
the
fertilizer.
sludge or fertilizer byproducts. The sludge master. Style over his door.
I will let the deputy chief counsel know that
Yeah.
has inherited a new title from Seminole Government Operations.
It's very defensive, you
Just-
know, the sludge master.
The last change to highlight for you is going to be on page 29. During the initial walkthrough, I highlighted that there's some clarification around the types of rates and assessments that could be applied specifically for stormwater to include equivalent residential units based on area of impervious surface for a given residence, the average residence. Page 29 adds a new subsection to 24 VSA 3617 to clarify a use for that revenue. And it's an important clarification that the charges, receipts, and revenue from those assessments may be used for stormwater management, control, and treatment, flood resiliency, floodplain restoration, and other similar measures. This language is squared with some of the materials from ANR and DPC on programs that are available.
That's it.
The last thing to flag for you, is just conformity amendment. There's a new section 8 and it's just correcting a cross-reference that changed. Because of what you're doing in section 7.
Section 7 is a long.
Center Watch.
Is this from that third chapter?
It is from the third chapter,
Okay.
so there is a third chapter of law related to utilities. And it is for consolidated districts,
Mhm.
and that is not changing because that's. Of course, many municipalities coming together to form a regional.
Got it. Okay, cool. So, any questions for Tucker on this section? Okay. And there was one cross-reference that ANR pointed out. Did that get changed in here or is it?
Yes, it did. So. And actually, I believe that maybe
Is that supposed to be
Kim has done
16?
this.
It's on page
Mention.
27, I think, on
Correct.
line 14. Did get changed, it just didn't get highlighted.
Right. So there was an outdated reference to section 3613, which related to temporary discharge permits, and that has been corrected to the section that relates to discharge permits, right?
Thank you.
You know, the
Um,
technical.
All right, thank you, Tucker. Thank you, Senator Watson, too, for your work on this. And, okay, so now we're back on, well, and sections 8A is just the repeal of the chapter 97. So
Yes.
it's just renumbered.
It's
Right.
renumbered.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so now we're back on section 9, Tim. You
Yes.
are,
Can everybody hear me?
yes.
Okay, good. So now we'll turn to the creation of the Urban Search and Rescue Team in section 9.
Yeah.
This bill incorporates section 6 of H 627, which was an act relating to emergency preparedness and hazard response. In particular, this section that is 9 here, and the strike all amendments to the bill, will create the Urban Search and Rescue Team, or USAR team, within the Department of Public Safety, and this now allocates $750,000 annually to the Department of Public Safety to facilitate the operations of the USAR team. You could see that. Let's see.
Where's the appropriations on?
D at the bottom of 32.
Yeah, okay, good.
And the changes in here were some language changes that were suggested by Eric. Do you have others, or is this looking okay?
It looks okay.
Okay, excellent.
So,
Okay, go ahead, Tim.
oh, sure. The next part of the bill is, let's see, has to do with Vermont 211 information privacy, section 10. And although this has not been changed, just to recap, the section will require Vermont 211 to keep confidential any personal information acquired from victims of natural disasters, except for coordinating relief work for affected individuals.
And this language, we probably need to work on still to make sure
Okay.
it is workable with what needs to happen. But yeah, Senator White.
No, I just was feeling that we should have this section in, and, but I'm just wondering what, when you mean work on it.
We just wanna make sure that this wouldn't prevent the sharing that we want to have happen.
Yes, okay.
So I think Eric's gonna talk to some people, who need the data or have legitimate reasons for needing the data and how to make sure this works.
I was less concerned, this section previous to testimony we had earlier in the week, I had been like, great, yeah, let's think about privacy. After some of the things we heard in testimony, I feel very strongly about this section, so whatever we do, I hope we do tackle the issue of private information being given to groups who are using it to act in not necessarily nefarious ways, but ways that you don't want to experience after a disaster.
Yeah, we just wanna make sure only the people who are needing this information for,
Yeah.
especially, when it's government data, so,
Exactly.
So Eric's gonna know what I'm gonna say here, but I would like to pair this, align it with the privacy, if we can, as much as possible, privacy issues we're talking about, the landlord certificate. And how that information, now that we're beefing up the landlord certificate, and we still haven't figured out how we're gonna use that together, right, Eric? But I would, now that we've beefed it up and have more personal information in it, we also want to keep it confidential, except disclosed in needs of a disaster,
Oh.
which is where this ties in. So, I would hope we could kind of make this consistent, and my hope, I'm just gonna say this to you because I don't get to see all the time. We can speak maybe with Sue Minter about about good uses for it, and anyway, we more to talk about that.
I'd love to talk about that. My concern is always that if I become
I know, you don't wanna be
the owner of all the data, then all of a sudden I have to be the communicator of it and I have to,
you're the gatekeeper of
I'm
it.
the gatekeeper, and as opposed to handing it off to people that can use it in a good way.
I know.
We don't necessarily have the organizational structure in the SEOC to use
But
something like that.
I just wanted to let people know that we have this other issue, I'd like to make sure we have that cleared out.
Senator Nikos.
I appreciate that, and I also find this language important. I think anytime that and I wanna know, if I get my information to the government, that it's gonna be only used
Throwing things at us from the other room, sorry.
in certain ways, and if the government chooses to then contract with another agency, my data should be just as protected as
Yeah.
it was when it was with the government.
And so maybe it's, you use the word contracting, and so maybe it's something through contracting with or partnering with or something. So, Tim and Tucker, if you can think about how we might make this more effective without having unintended consequences, that would be great. So I'm just starring it, we're just putting a pin in it. Okay, so go on section 11.
Okay,
I would just want to bring up in that situation is,
Okay.
there are organizations that show up sans any data and just arbitrarily, they were here to help. And having collars around that is much tougher, like putting guardrails on data that we own and we create, we collect, it's much easier than just, people might show up and people might infer that they got some data from the government, and they may not, they just show up, bad things happen, so they show up, so that's a little bit bigger of a project.
Right.
And it's something that we're looking at DEM is how we can manage those
Right.
folks that show up to help.
Right, and some people
And they're
show
great,
up
we don't-
with really good
Yeah.
intentions and are
I
really,
would
really,
say
really
most-
helpful.
most
Most of
show
them
up
are,
that-
yeah.
And they're great.
And then some people show up with maybe not such good intentions, so,
Exactly.
yeah.
And those
Okay.
who want to protect people.
All right, sorry, Tim, section
Okay.
11.
so turning now to best management practices for rebuilding after emergencies. We have just that one section 11. And again, you may recall that this bill incorporates sections 14, 15, 18 of another bill, H 723, which was named an act relating to flood recovery, as well as all of S 223, an act relating to the assessment of the Vermont Emergency Management Division's disaster preparedness. In essence, this section will require the Department of Public Safety's Division of Emergency Management, or VEM, to perform what's now being phrased as an after-action review.
That like
And this, oh, sorry, go ahead.
debriefing that,
A much more formal process.
Yeah.
It's a what happened and areas for improvement and strengths, and that can be get better.
and you'll see some new language highlighted here, which kind of reframes things. In addition to any requirements imposed by the federal Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, the review may supplementally include this is what was required before, but now this is just kind of supplemental. Examining the adequacy of early warning and evacuation orders, designated evacuation routes and emergency shelters, the present system of local emergency management directors in widespread emergencies, and the state's present emergency communication system.
So,
Oh,
Senator
sorry.
North, you have a question?
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry, I saw your hand. I do note that this is a may, and this had been a shall, so I just wanna make sure everybody sees that.
I don't know if you shall.
No, that may include these other things.
The review shall.
They have to do the review. They have to do the review by form of federal law.
Oh, I see. Maybe.
And they have to do it now if this passes, because we've asked them, it's gonna happen, it's happening already. These were things that that we have talked about wanting included that may or may not be included. So do we want to keep that a may or a shall?
I think it should be a shall.
Okay. Let's change, sorry, Eric, we're gonna change that may to a shall, Tim, on line 19.
Okay.
And the reason is because these are things that
No,
33, bottom of page 33.
I know.
These are things that have been identified by lots of our constituents and lots of legislators have heard concerns about making sure that these get addressed in any kind of review.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because I'm just seeing shalls,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, like, look at line,
I was-
the bottom on line
Yeah.
19.
Okay, Tim, carry on.
Okay, and the remaining parts of this section, which will not change until, let's see, VM will also publish best management practices for rebuilding after emergencies, and will also report back to both the House and Senate Committees on Government Operations on both the outcome of the review and the best management practices.
So Eric, the best management practices for rebuilding, is that in your jurisdiction? Like, is that stuff you do?
I spoke to our mitigation team and they think that it makes sense for us to coordinate them. There'll be a lot of other organizations involved in, building back better,
Right.
creating this report.
Okay, so should we put in here something like in coordination with others that we can either list or just say, because when I read this, I was like, is that something that PDM does? And so I'm curious who else would be involved or should be involved.
Yeah, A&R and DFS. For sure.
Where you were at the top of
Page
14.
34, E1. So A&R, and who did you say? DE,
DFS, fire safety.
DFS.
DFS.
Division,
Oh.
division of
Division of
fire.
Fire safety.
Okay. Okay. There also. Maybe this is, BGS is not, they're not, it's nothing they do, okay. Just thinking buildings, trying to think.
when I was thinking housing,
Oh, yeah. Okay, so Tim, if we can just add like in coordination with or collaboration with A&R and Division of Fire Safety.
I wonder, you know, I have an issue with lists.
I like that though.
And you know, that's who it is right now, but it could be a changing landscape, and so I wonder if it makes more sense to put like in coordination with other required state agencies.
Or other stakeholders. It
Well,
may
it's
not be
a one-time report,
Oh, okay,
so it's not like an ongoing thing.
Okay.
I would say yes if this were permanent, but
for some reason, my brain had me thinking that we were setting this up to occur after any emergency.
I thought so too.
Yes,
I thought
maybe
this
that
was
makes sense, but
after
I don't
every-
know.
I thought this
Don't
was
think
part of
we
the
were-
after action.
Well, they're gonna publish best practices for how to rebuild from a flood or other hazard. So the best practices are permanent, but designing of the best practices is a one-time thing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
So in the best practices, we would wanna make sure that the lists are inclusive.
Or not lists at all.
Or no lists.
I like this
Okay.
list. I like my.
Tim. Carry on, section 12.
Okay, so let's see. Now we go into the section of the bill having to do with shelter identification and funding shelter operation. In section 12, this section requires VEM in consultation with the Agency of Human Services to publish best management practices for the placement and funding of local emergency shelters. And you'll see the highlighted language inserts in consultation with Agency of Human Services, 3 different spots.
And I think that I sent you after it was too late, some additional language for this section.
Yes.
Okay, so next time we'll have more in this.
And
Senator Clarkson.
so, given that I'm all about trying to beef up and keep well home, our local emergency shelters and our local our neighbors and communities engaged in disaster response. Where is the stuff we talked about making sure that we had a robust and tried to maintain robust local volunteer emergency recovery groups? Remember we had that long conversation?
Yeah, I think that's incorporated.
So not long-term recovery groups, those would be different. These,
Yeah,
we included language that indicated that DEM would advise local municipalities, one, on the siting of their shelters and the staffing of their shelters, but also exercising and training,
Yeah.
reevaluating their.
Because that's what we just lost after about 2 years after I read. We did all that great work doing planning with everybody. And
Yeah,
then
so-
we just stopped. And so if we had a disaster tomorrow, or we had to open up the Woodstock Elementary School, I don't even know if their generator still works. I mean, none of that is still, are we still keeping? on
I'm
top?
going to toot my resource horn as usual.
Oh.
Yes, the state has had several rounds of bids for local municipalities to get generators funded, again, with a match.
Yeah,
But it's what I call disaster amnesia, right? After Irene.
exactly.
It's well after this one, it's gonna last, but then it peters off. So
Disaster. I mean,
It's all about whether you can keep the momentum going. And part of that is the EMDs, although in statute, are not required to be full-time EMDs. They're
Yeah.
just
So can
someone.
we charge the EMD with, or suggest, or where can we put in that the local EMD has to meet, or need, best practice would be to have the EMD call together and review or do an exercise once a year or once every other. I mean, it just, how do we keep that amnesia at bay and really keep a community lean, mean fighting machine in response to disasters?
So we have, the statute dictates that they have a local emergency management plan that's submitted to us each year.
Right.
We review it, and in that is a section on shelters. But currently it's just where your shelter is. It's not a plan.
Exactly.
So some of the language that Jason and I from AHS drafted was about having a plan. So
Yeah.
this is your number 1 shelter, but if that doesn't work, this is your 2 shelter. And if that doesn't work, you go to the regional shelter, like having an idea, and that plan might include exercises and trainings. And we do have the EMD certification course that we have been pushing through. The EMDs has a course on sheltering fundamentals. So we try to push that as well.
And
and this is in the next draft, that's what I said.
Oh, sorry, I
Eric gave me
missed
the language that was, but I didn't get it until it was too late to put it in
Sorry,
the
I
draft.
didn't hear.
So next time. Okay, let's move on, Tim. It's getting late. So emergency communications, I think is the next.
Yes.
Yes.
And this is sections 13 through 15. These sections will require VEM in consultation with the Enhanced 911 Board to develop policy using E911 to provide more effective VT alerts in large emergencies. And you'll see a lot of changes here, namely having to do with updating and modernizing some of the terminology. So you'll see the phrase originating carriers a lot here. And so again, these sections will modernize statutory language so that originating carriers are required to provide location and caller data in accordance with current 911 standards. Originating carriers must also notify their customers of outages impacting communication with 911 or receiving emergency notifications. That's the same from the 310. And these sections will also require the enhanced 911 board in consultation with the Public Utilities Commission to evaluate and report on current tariffs for service elements necessary for the provision of enhanced 911 services. That last bit is new.
And this is all language that was agreed on between the Public Service Department and E911 and came from them. So because it's a lot of technical stuff. And if we have questions on it, I think we could have them back in, or I can send them a note with your questions or whatever, but this came from them based on our conversations with them. So. All right, sections, if there are no questions on that, section 16, the interpretation stuff.
Yes, interpretation services for emergency communications. This is section 16 through 18, and these sections will require VEM to ensure interpretation services are being provided to individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind, and to individuals with limited English proficiency for all state emergency communications. These sections will appropriate $15,000 for improving state police radio communications and $25,000 for outreach to increase VT alert registration and to educate the public on when it comes to emergency preparedness. These sections will also create an interpretation services for emergency communications working group to develop and report on best practices for the distribution of interpretation services on mass communication platforms to ensure that emergency communications are being effectively delivered to individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind, and to individuals with limited English language proficiency.
So this section came out of both the testimony from the disability, the deaf, hard of hearing, and then racial equity and the Broadcasters Association, who offered to be involved and trying especially to be able to have the CART and picture-in-picture techniques. One of the issues, I think there needs to be a little bit more work on this this sort of working group or whatever it's called, because I don't know that it needs to be exactly this formal. But it also puts the onus on VEM because we can't direct the Broadcasters Association to do something. But they did offer on the record.
They said they'd be down.
They said they'd be down. And gives them a little bit of money, one-time money to upgrade the state police radio transmission towers and also to do the outreach campaign to get more people on VT alert. So Eric, I know, has some concerns on this section. And I think we can continue to work on it, but that's the general, we want to make sure that everybody can understand and gets access to emergency information. Do you want to say?
Yeah, I just have a few quick, my first one is just that part A is saying that VEM has to do something. But then part B is the working group that figures out how to do it. So
Yeah,
applying one without the findings of the other makes me a little bit nervous. VEM is going to and always work to try to get the services there. Obviously the translation services is a little bit more difficult, but the interpretation services trying to get those, but specifically the technology behind CART and PIP is what we're a little bit worried about. And then the other thing is a more nuanced, under C, line 19, it says within 3 months following an all hazard event or annually. I think it would make more sense to nix the 3 months because within 3 months of an event, we're still kind of digging out and going through the AAR. So having it every year, regardless of an event or not, I think would make a lot of sense. And the people you have in it makes a lot of sense. We would just have our PIO run that, who's the person that.
So within,
Right.
how many times?
so we'll just make that an annual thing.
Yeah.
On line 19.
Okay.
Within the 3 months thing. And in terms of ensure that, and we can talk about that language a little bit. A lot of it is just. We wanna make sure that it happens. We can't require the broadcasters to do it
Yeah.
because it's an FCC. We literally don't regulate them. So. Let me think about the chicken and egg cart horse thing and see if we can come up with language that makes. You feel a little less nervous.
Yeah, and fundamentally, we're trying to do it, so it's not.
Yeah, no, I understand.
like, It's just,
I know you're not trying to get out of it, but I understand you also can't physically or technologically do this thing. Senator Dikowski.
I'm wondering, Eric or Senator Hardy, what your thoughts are on having a different effective date for that part that is after the report.
Oh. That might work. Then we put it in here, but then you're not
delayed,
having a little
something
delay.
like implement the findings of said report.
Yeah,
Yeah, like, it was just this section, everything that's in here shall be effective on July 1st, but this section would be effective. I see the reports due December 15th, so maybe of 2025, so maybe July 1st of 2026. So it gives you 6 months to implement after the report.
Yeah, I think just off the cuff, the issue might be that the report says that something isn't possible.
right, but then you can always change the effective date,
Yeah.
because there's a legislative session in there, so. Did you hear that, Tim, about the effective dates thing?
Sure. Would you like the entire section to come in at a later effective date? We could also convert it to session law and have a more kind of narrative quality that ties it to, requiring VEM to adopt the findings of that report versus kind of putting this into statute, kind of into the books here. It could be modified a few different ways. I'm just kind of raising.
Right, I think we wanna have, just speaking for myself, I think I wanna have this in
Yeah.
statute,
Okay.
the requirements. And then, but the report is session law, and the statute would have a delayed effective date.
Sure.
So let's go with that for now and sort of mull it still, and see if that will work. Cause I wanna make sure that this is a requirement that we have and we're sort of on the hook for it. We collectively are on the hook for it. The legislature needs to come back and make sure this happens, and VEM needs to make sure it happens. Somebody will remember. Because it would be required in statute.
Okay. And so the report's due on December 15th, 2024. So, sorry, what the date that was being bandied about, was that January 1st, 2025, or was it later than that?
So if the report's due December 15th, 24, then have this section go into effect. July 1st, 25.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
that we have a legislative session in between in case we need to make changes.
Okay. I've made a note of that. Thank you.
Right, does that feel a little better, Erin?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Tanya. All right,
Okay. The next part of the bill pertains to the creation of Chief Climate Resilience Officer. And this is just section 19 on page 44. Right now, this will change it so that the Chief Climate Resilience Officer shall report to and be under the general supervision of the governor. Before it was housed in the Department of Public Safety.
and this.
I think there's still some surviving reference to that in subpart B. We can change that.
Oh, yeah, okay. So this was sort of trying to make this a more high level position. Similar to, I think the position I can think of that's similar is the Chief Prevention Officer, which also is a position that reports directly to the governor, sort of outside of the Department of Health. But has a connection to the Department of Health. And this 90,000 is not enough money for this position, so we will have to change that if we continue to keep this, but again. I'm hoping we can find a funding source that would pay for everything that's in the bill, including ongoing positions and grants and things like that, so. I'm keeping a
I like
tally.
your enthusiasm.
Yeah, well, we're going for it. Senator Clarkson.
So our big oil super fund that we, sadly, we have to go see for years if we win that case. That is an obvious place for the money to come from. In the intervening years, I'm hoping that actually we may see something from at least the first suit from the AG's office, but we're gonna see significant sums if we win that case, second case too. So I would think first it should come from there. And in the interim, I think we have to come up with an interim. And could actually say those things here, or we could talk about them with our
Counterparts and judiciary.
Well,
I think it should be included, because where are you with that bill?
So we actually, most of our day today was spent on that bill, and we sent it back, with, what did you call him? Master Sludge?
Oh, the master of the sludge.
Michael.
To do some,
Michael.
to do some markup, and I think we would, some of these things, there's a lot of conversation about where should this go, what should happen to it, but I agree that there should be some level of harmonization between our work here and that.
I think we might be able to reference that fund, but that fund is so not guaranteed at this point that I wouldn't want to hinge all of this on that
Well,
fund.
that was my ask.
So
is
I
that we're
think,
looking at that.
like I said, I'm meeting with Chair of Finance, we're gonna have larger conversations, it's kind of out of our hands. Cause no matter what we do in this bill in here, they're gonna change it across the hall, or could change it across the hall, so, we're gonna.
But this is an issue with every one of our flood recovery and river corridor work and our long-term mitigation work, which is quite honestly, we don't have enough money to pay for all the work that needs to happen. And it's taken decades to get to this point, and decades of abuse of our environment. And ideally, that's where it comes. The interim is gonna be a challenge, and we are, I think we all should put our best thinking caps on between now and tomorrow. Or now in the week, we have next week to.
Yeah, we're not voting this out tomorrow.
So we
still more
have time,
Yeah,
but it's
yep.
a challenge to find the interim money.
Okay, Tim, the survivor benefits thing, I don't know that we need to go, oh, sorry, Ann, I'm sorry, Sarah wants to go ahead.
Thank you about that. I did have a request to include in the survivor benefits. We've even included DBW workers, but there was a similar.
What line are you on?
So it would be page 46, line 9, include water and sewer. I'm sorry, water workers, just like they are not always public works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think Damien is working on that
Okay.
definition.
Oh, okay.
And what it would include, and I think he's heard that.
Okay, great.
I think
So
So we
it's
should
not
answer-
in here yet,
But it's on his
Dave-
radar.
yeah, it's on his radar. Damien and Tim are gonna coordinate on the definitions in the bills.
Okay, thank you.
And so to be determined, but yes, hopefully in the next draft we'll have that.
Great, I wanna make sure.
Yeah, and same definitional conversation with the first responders. piece.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, ideally those would be the same answer.
Right, well, the same definitions
Yeah.
in both sections of the bill for when we're talking about those people.
So not use two different definitions,
Yeah.
in the same bill.
And just to note on the section 20, the post-secondary disaster management program, Olivia has sent this language to UVM and the Vermont State Colleges to get their reaction to it and see if this should or shouldn't stay in the bill. That was a suggestion of one of our witnesses, and we haven't taken any direct testimony on it. So I don't know if it's a feasible thing. I don't know if you have thoughts on it, Eric.
It's on my long-term plan to have an undergraduate program for emergency management, so if you're kickstarting it, I'm happy.
Okay, awesome. That's great.
Does that mean you're
I'm glad to
smiling?
hear that.
I need a feeder system, right? I need.
You
Yeah,
need
yeah.
a feeder system.
I'm glad to hear that, because we hadn't gotten any testimony except for that it was suggested by what's his name at the Vermont Community Foundation, Dan Smith.
Dan Smith.
And I think he's the former
He is.
something at Vermont State Colleges, so. He-
So St. Mike's had something they were working on a pilot. I think it may have fizzled out. I think Norwich is looking at some stuff.
Okay,
So yeah, as emergency management becomes more of a kind of a degree program around the country, we're hoping that it gets incorporated into some of the local.
Okay. that's great to hear. That's consistent with this then, so I'll let you know what I hear from them. All right, Senator Clarkson.
So before we leave page 44 altogether, I think at least we should update this sum on line 7 to 150, which is where generally we put in for a position of that level
Okay,
as a starter. And then it depends on how much staff you want them to have, so I just.
one
saying,
second, did you hear
start
that,
at
Tim?
150.
On line
Yes,
7,
150 for the appropriation for that position.
Sorry.
the Chief Climate Resilient Officer.
Yes.
Put that in there for now,
Okay,
try to get money to pay for that.
We have a lot in here.
Okay, yeah, need to clarify definition in red letters there, Senator Watson and White. All right, so let's skip then that section, because we know it's gonna be updated, Damien is working on it. And the 50,000 is gonna get updated to 80,000 for the death benefit.
Sorry, where is
And
it?
that's on top of page 49, that's just still in the survivor benefits.
It's gonna be updated to 80.
And then, okay, so then bottom of page 50, section 23, so, him and I went through. The sort of general emergency powers of the governor in an emergency to try to come up with. To see what needed to be updated. Some of it is really old, it was drafted in the 1950s, like during the. Kind of, 1950s era language, and some of it's more recent than that, but just to make sure it made sense, and so this is still an ongoing project. I've also asked Eric to look at it and see if he has updates. But this is the start of it, so Tim, if you wanna start on the bottom of page 50.
sure. So, and would it be helpful, Chair Hardy, just to kind of give a summary of some of the larger changes and then kind of work our way through just?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So this is the emergency powers of the governor and emergency management sections 22 through 32.
Oh, yeah,
These
actually, page
sections do-
49, sorry.
So these sections do a few things. First, they remove various instances of catch-all language in the governor's emergency powers so that the powers are limited to the scope of each statutory section. And so they don't bleed into other things or just kind of enable kind of context-less authority. These sections also tie the sections regarding the acceptance of gifts, grants, and loans during emergencies to the regular statutory process for doing so, which that regular process in 32 VSA Section 5 does include an expedited process as well. These sections also change who may appoint some members of the State Emergency Response Commission, as well as these sections will bring terminology into conformance across statutory sections. One example of this is we have various instances of a state of emergency being either declared or proclaimed. So we changed it all to declared. So there's less ambiguity there. So returning back to the actual language here, we start at the bottom of page 49 and section 22, which will amend 20 VSA section 1, purpose and policy. Let's see, where is the first one? So we have in subsection 4, and this is we have some clarification of language, just kind of making it more hopefully digestible and sensible to the average reader. So where it said before, to authorize the establishment of organizations and the taking of steps as necessary and appropriate to carry out, we'll just say to carry out provisions of this chapter as necessary and appropriate. So those are the kind of less of substance changes that you'll see more often than substantive changes throughout here. Next section, amending Title 20 VSA Section 8, General Powers of the Governor. Subsection B is in performing the duties under this chapter, the governor is further authorized and empowered to. We have, let's see, inserting the term water under inventories, training, and mobilization. As far as what the, let's see, in accordance with the plan and program for emergency management of the state to ascertain the requirements of the state or the municipalities for food, water, clothing, and other necessities of life, including water in there. Now, just kind of rounding out those categories for materials provided in first aid situations. The next part, 8, is more of, we do have the technical correction at the bottom of firefighting, but more of substance in there. We have a reference to the State Guard units being removed. So now it just says the National Guard.
There used to be a state guard. There's not a state guard anymore.
So it's not just the national, it's not the Vermont National Guard, it's just an old thing that doesn't
It's an
exist.
old thing that doesn't exist.
And they
We
said,
had to research it.
we still have the nickels in our room, so that means that we must not be doing anything wrong on that front. We've communicated with them.
The what? The pickle. They didn't steal our pickles for taking.
Oh, I have that
No.
insight, Tanya, for you on the,
Excellent.
Okay,
on the,
let's not get off topic here. Additional emergency powers, so this is the next one, I think.
Yes,
Bob-
in section 24, we have just changing a term for conformity's sake, so proclaim to declare.
Oh.
The next section, sorry, was there a question?
No,
I
no,
love
go ahead.
the idea that it needs to be proclaimed.
The next section, 25, has to do with additional emergency powers, that is of the governor. Let's see. So the first change on line 20 will, again, this removes some of that kind of catch-all open-ended language, restricting it to the duration of the declaration of emergency. That is the governor's power to authorize any department or agency of the state to lease or lend on such terms and conditions and for such a period related to the declaration of emergency to promote the public welfare and protect the interests of the state. I should note here that it's not strictly limited to the time period of the declaration of emergency, but some time frame which is unspecified but is related to there. So that's what could be described as either a flexible or perhaps ambiguous term related. I'll just kind of leave that there. And then at the bottom of that sentence, there's some language that's removed having to do with authorizing the temporary transfer or employment of personnel of the state government to or by the U.S. Armed Forces.
So this, I just note, when I read this, I was like, oh, Tim, the governor could make you go into the US Army because you're an employee of the state. So it was a little creepy. So
But it's not what it's,
I'm removing it, because yes, look,
That is
read
what it
it,
was
top
told.
of 53.
Yeah.
There's that
Temporary
allowed the governor to say any state employee could go be deployed to the US Army.
Would that apply to the General Assembly as well, or would that be a?
I don't know, but I thought it should be taken.
I think you are correct.
I
It was a little.
agree with that, but.
Has anyone- did you check with, and about that?
I checked with Tim and now we're checking with you guys.
Could we put a note to our archivist to see if this power has ever been used?
Yes, I think that's a good
I just
question.
Do we wanna spend more time on this, you guys?
I bet you could
We can
personally send the archivist an email and ask.
I
and
am
bring
going
the
to.
answer
Okay,
back.
we can do that.
I
Myself,
will do
thank you, Senator White. All right, carry on, Tim.
Okay. The next modification is the end of subdivision 2 here, where we remove some more of that open-ended language, saying that the governor may do all things to perform all acts necessary to effectuate the purpose for which the contract was entered into. Removing this would narrow the ability of the governor to, without really restricting, sorry, I should say, removes the catch-all language. But being able to execute the contract is implied here anyways. But this is just another one of those instances of removing that catch-all language that could enable the governor to exercise authority beyond maybe just that the intent of the statutory section. The next section that's modified, next page, this is under subdivision 5. To make compensation for, the governor may, let's see, make compensation for property seized, taken, or condemned on the following bases. And here we have my attempt of cleaning up this language. This is takings in a temporary or permanent use of property during an emergency. And just kind of clarifies that the takings language does apply to both the temporary and permanent use of it. The permanent before was just implied there, where it was temporary and then it was so damaged or just never returned. It was kind of a question as to what would happen there. Although it was implied that permanent takings would be at play, this explicitly spells it out. And aside from that nuance, and then kind of making some of this language more gender neutral, I don't think there's much more to say about that. The next power that is being amended is halfway through page 55, and this is subdivision 6, which removes, again, more kind of broad open-ended power for the governor, saying to perform and exercise other functions, powers, and duties as necessary to promote and secure the safety and protection of the civilian population.
That's already sort of embedded in other duties, and this was very open-ended. You know, it's already in a state of emergency, the governor can do things to protect the civilian population. This is just very open-ended, so. Yeah. Okay,
The next section, 26, amends 20 VSA section 13, termination of emergencies. And let's see, where are we? Here we have a simple change again, a changing proclamation to declaration. Nothing else has been changed there. The next section having to do, this is 27, amending 20 VSA section 17, gift, grant, or loan. This is what I was speaking to before in my brief overview. This ties it to other statutory procedures for the government accepting gifts and loans and grants under 32 VSA section 5. In section 5 there is a process for expedited or an expedited process is afforded there. And so we have this language mirrored for gifts, grants, or loans coming from federal sources in subsection A, and then from private sources in subsection B.
okay,
The next section is 28, which will amend 20 VSA section 26. This will change, this kind of modernizes some of the language here, in particular changing the name of the title itself from change of venue because of an enemy attack to an all hazards event, which is what disasters are described as. So that's the term for disaster throughout this chapter. And this has to do with basically court hearings and things like that. And of substance here, it now includes, let's see, it provides that an event of where, let's see, in the event that the place where a civil action or criminal prosecution is required by law to be brought has become and remains unsafe because of an attack on the US or Canada, or, and this is new language, of a because of a public health emergency, it can be moved.
yeah. We might want to change that just to an all, or an all hazards emergency too, and
Sure.
add that just in there.
Okay, so change public to all hazards event. Okay.
Well, public health is emergency is okay, but
I would do all hazard,
and all hazards event.
I'd keep it consistent.
Okay.
New chapter title with the new.
Okay,
Well, public health emergency was put in there because during the pandemic, they had to change venues for court
Oh, right.
cases. That actually was a thing. Then there was a Supreme Court case again about it, related to it.
Right,
So,
Public health emergency is not the same as all.
yeah,
so you can add,
yeah, okay, Tim,
okay.
enemy attack, you think.
page 59.
Yes. So, sorry, I'm just making one more note. Section 29, and just go,
50.
so modifying 20 VSA 30, State of Emergency Response Commission and the creation of it. This will modify how members are appointed. Before there was, of the 9 public members on the board, there are other ex officio members, sorry, of the commission, 17 total. Of the 9 public ones, before or under current law, the governor appoints all of these in staggered 3-year terms. This would modify it so that of the 9, 3 will remain being appointed by the governor, 3 would be appointed by the Speaker of the House, and 3 would be appointed by the President pro temp of the Senate. And there's some language about kind of phasing that in.
Thank you.
The next section, 34, has to do with temporary housing for disaster victims. Sorry, this is section 30, modifying 20 VSA, section 34, temporary housing for disaster victims. And again, this just modifies some of the nomenclature, changing from proclaimed a disaster to declares an emergency, and then a major disaster to an all hazards event. And then, let's see, we remove some catch-all language in subdivision A2. And this is, again, where whenever the governor declares an emergency under the laws of the state, governor is authorized to assist any political subdivision of the state that is the locus of temporary housing for disaster victims to acquire sites necessary for the temporary housing and removal of some open-end language to do all things required. So just say, and to prepare the site to receive and utilize temporary housing units by. And then, let's see, I think the rest of that language remains the same. Moving on to subsection B. Here we, instead of under the rules adopted by the governor, it changes the language to during a declared state of emergency, the governor may, by order or rule. This clarifies and brings it into conformity with other sections in this chapter that the governor may adopt a rule through the rulemaking, expedited rule or emergency rule process, more likely will issue an executive order. And so this just provides for the reality of the executive order being one option as well as the rule.
Yeah.
And then, let's see. Also clarifies below, let's see, so this is for the temporarily suspending or modifying for not more than 60 days, any law or rule permitting to public health, safety, zoning, or transportation, and then adding an if the governor deems the suspension or modification essential to provide temporary housing for disaster victims. This removes some language, the parenthetical within or across the state, which is redundant, and also or other requirements of law or rules within Vermont when proclaimed. And so again, removing some of that catch-all language. And I see there's a issue with some of the strikeout there, which we'll correct too.
Okay.
Then later on in this section, subsection D is repealed. This is more open-ended language. The governor is authorized to adopt rules as necessary to carry out the purpose of this chapter. And so we have some of that language that is broader than the section it's in, just speaking largely to all the chapter versus just the section. Let's see. F is remove some kind of dead wood language. Here there's kind of some,
Would save a lot.
this is at the top of 62, sorry, and removes the references to major disaster, emergency, and temporary housing as referred to in the FEMA Act, the Disaster Relief Act of 1974. The temporary housing, that definition actually I don't think is in the Disaster Relief Act. Also, major disaster, we use all hazard events, and emergency, we don't,
Yeah.
that here.
All right, then the last section on page 64.
Yes,
All this money fees,
So this isn't changed.
so this doesn't change. What we do though is this bill, the
Oh.
amendment, will basically roll one section into another. Really the enforcement mechanism from the subsequent section. So 20 VSA, section 40 enforcement is actually all the language that will be added into the prior one. And this kind of clarifies that, okay, the enforcement mechanism has to do with the fees to the hazardous substance funds rather than enforcement of the rest of the chapter, because there's really nobody to enforce against, or at least when we read this through, it made sense to us that the enforcement mechanism would really be tied to the hazardous substance determination language here.
So we're just combining two chapters together because they belong together and they had been separate before. Yeah, it's not changing the language, it's just combining the chapters.
Correct.
Okay.
And
Okay,
then the last bit is the effective date, which this act shall take effect on July 1st, 2024. And I've made a note above to adjust that so that it'll have two effective dates.
okay. Excellent. Thank you so much, Tim.
Very welcome.
Committee, I know it's late and that was a long bill, 64 pages. So
good work.
here is the charge though. So if possible, I would love to vote this out next week, like Thursday or Friday. We've reserved all of Thursday and all of Friday for this bill. Tuesday, we're doing open meeting law. Wednesday, we're doing some miscellaneous stuff. And Thursday and Friday, we're doing this. And so I would love for all of you to go through this bill with as fine a tooth comb as you can and see, how you feel about the language, what might be missing, what shouldn't be in here, and do that over the weekend so that we're ready next week to really go through it. And Eric, if you can do that too, that would be great. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And because we need to get it out so that the two money committees have time to work on it as well after town meeting break. So does that sound like a good plan, everyone? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Tim.